40-man roster deadline ahead of the Rule 5 draft is coming up on Tuesday, and the Cleveland Guardians have some tough decisions to make on several prospects. We'll get into it on today's Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends and Guardians fans all around the world. Thanks for joining us for our favorite half hour of the day. We hope it's yours as well. For the next half hour, we're talking about your Cleveland Guardians on Locked On Guardians, the only daily podcast that covers your team every day, from the majors, the minors, the draft, everything in between. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. If you're never there, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Justin Lada, one of your two co-hosts for the last 3 years and counting. And if you're new here, before joining my friend and co-host Jeff Ellis, I spent 18 years and counting covering the Guardians minor league farm system as a prospect writer and editor from Arizona all the way to Columbus.
And as he mentioned, I'm Jeff Ellis. He's the greenish looking green right now. Having some technical difficulties on my end, so hopefully you're a big fan of Pickles or the Hulk. As he said, I'm Jeff Ellis. I've been here since the beginning of MLB baseball for Locked On. Before that, I was national writer at Scott 24/7, focused on prospects and the draft. I want to thank you for making today's episode your first listen today and every day, wherever it is you get podcasts, as well as a big shout out to all of our everydayers getting in there, getting in the comments, commenting on how long they've been listening to the show. So thank you to everyone for joining the conversation and for watching yesterday's show and today's show.
Yeah, special shout out to everydayer Robert Nero, who asked me some questions, as many did on Twitter yesterday while I was sitting through the Jonas Brothers concert. So I do appreciate everybody who made that time there a little bit better for me and had a little more fun with that. Starting off on today's show, we're talking about the Guardians' 40-man roster decisions ahead of the next Tuesday's Rule 5 protection deadline. So lots to talk about there in a little bit. We're going to dig into who is on the 40-man bubble already and whose roster spot could be in limbo with these decisions. And what would a Thursday edition of Locked On Guardians be without Trade Talk Thursday? We've got a few trade news items to cover later in the episode, so lots of fun coming up. And Locked On Guardians, of course, is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5 in. If your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the FanDuel app today. So there's just one 100% lock, I think, for the Guardians that will add to the 40-man roster ahead of the Rule 5 deadline. That's, of course, shortstop Angel Genao, whose pronunciation I'm eager to hear more about because some of the prospects' pronunciations over the last couple of years have changed. So in 2024, he was in Lake County. I was told it was Angel Genao. But I've heard other names change in the past from their minor league days. So who knows? Genao, though, is not ready to contribute in 2026, which makes, I always think it very interesting to have to protect prospects who won't impact your roster next year. Like, obviously, you don't want to lose a guy like Genao, and it's always funny because, like, any team, if they were to draft him, like, say, for some reason Cleveland left him unprotected, he really wouldn't contribute to a major league team next year. They would just do their best to try to stash him, which is what teams always do. But for Cleveland, protecting him means they have to put him on the 40-man roster, not in the majors, luckily, but on the 40. And, he sits there for a year without being able to contribute to the major league roster, which they've had to do in the past because of, COVID and those things. Haven't had to do that as much, I would say, recently. But I think that's always an interesting component to these decisions.
Yeah, John Kent comes to mind, right? Like, I was kind of shocked when they added him the first time he popped up just because he was a first and third baseman and there literally hadn't been a player in like almost a decade who didn't play up the middle, who was taken out of, I believe, low A at the time, or was he at high
A? Either way, it was A-ball, yeah.
Either way, it was A-ball. Like, you just don't see a lot of guys taken from there. So that's a player that comes to mind where they have... Now, obviously, Genao's up to Double-A. He's if they didn't put him on there, he'd be the first pick in the draft. A team would jump, and they would find a way. Utility role, backup, boom. That's the type of situation you would see. He's the top 3 prospect in the organization. He is an easy add, in my opinion. There's not too much more to add to it other than, it's like he has some great traits and tools. His listed height is incorrect in a lot of places. He is not
Yeah.
5'9", 5'10". He's a solid 6'1" now, 6'2", maybe even. Is he up to 6'3"? I was trying to remember what the last report I read was.
So if you head over to Next Year in Cleveland, where my newsletter is, and thanks to Arthur Kinney, who goes through the media guide every single year, comes out and updates all the player names and numbers and heights and weights. So Genao is up to, I believe, 6'2", 180, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, he has him at 6'1", 190 is what he's got him at. So you can trust that those are accurate just because that's what Cleveland has in their media guide. It may not be 100% accurate to either, but it's definitely better than the one that's listed on Fangraphs or Baseball Reference. But no, I'm excited for him now because he had a really good breakout 2024. This is a guy who is a strong defender up the middle, has a great arm, could play at third base or shortstop with his arm. It's a very aggressive approach at the plate, but there's legitimate pop. Like, this is not like Brian Rocchio pop. It's not, you know, a very fringe limited bat. It's a guy who actually can drive the ball. I'm not saying he's going to be a 25 home run guy, but I could see 15 or 20 home runs. We all thought Rocchio would get there, but he never had this kind of, I think, thump in the minors. Runs like a 70 grade runner as a switch hitter. The only thing I worry about him is the approach, but I think he'll be okay, and he's still pretty young. But yeah, there's not much more to say about him. I kind of went through, Jeff, and kind of ranked my feelings on who was going to be added, the most. I went through and it was like a confidence meter, So Yorman Gomez was number 2 on my list. Gomez was actually Rule 5 eligible in 2024 and didn't get taken because he hadn't really broken out yet. But he came out this year and his fastball velocity jumped from 92, 94 to now being more like 93, 95, dropping up to 96, 97. There's a good changeup there. There's a breaking ball. He's undersized, but there's a decent pitch mix there, and somebody I think would be an easy stash in the bullpen, even though he hasn't been above Double-A yet. And he could start next year at Triple-A, and I think he could. There's a possibility he could impact the team in 2026 if things go well, if he's shifted to the bullpen. So that was number 2 on my list.
No, I agree. Because A, he's very easy to stash. B, that velocity has been improving. He's a 2-pitch guy. I think you and I both think he's more than likely a reliever anyways. But yeah, he's a guy who I think could help a team next year. And then on top of that, I know he's not on MLB's top 30 list. They released, I think today, their top, all their top ranked guys who need to be added. But I think he's easily a top 25, maybe even top 20 prospect in system. So I agree. He's number 2.
I'll be curious to see how our number 3s match up or how we feel about this next player. To me, it's not a guy I would put number 3. I'm kind of doing this my confidence meter based on what I think the organization will do. And to me, that's, I think, Kahlil Watson. I think he's the 3rd most likely add to the 40-man roster. I don't personally believe in Watson because he's not a good enough center fielder, and he swings and misses in the zone too often, and he chases a lot. But I don't know. I have a feeling they might protect him just because of the upside, and they don't want to lose him for nothing. I could see them using him in a trade. Maybe they'll trade him on 40-man protection day, but I just can't see them leaving him off to be exposed in the Rule 5 draft at this point, even if I don't believe in him.
I think there's a chance they leave him off because I think we have seen enough where, and when you go and you look at his Savant page, all the things he has kind of the critical mass of things that are going to make a prospect not be successful in terms of swing rate, in terms of, air pull, all these teams kind of work to, all these things the teams know about, he doesn't do well. He's a great athlete. He is putting a lot of time in center field. There's always been just also he doesn't have a big red character flag, but he's had a lot of little ones, and that also holds him back. To me, he would be closer to 6th on a list. Just because I think there's so many negatives that it outweighs the positive. I don't see a way for him to be a successful major leaguer based on what we've seen in terms of profile.
Yeah, personally, he would be number 5 on my list. I put him at 3 for the likelihood of the Guardians, but on my personal list to add, he's 5. If the Guardians want to add more than 3 players or even have an open roster spot heading into the Rule 5 draft, which they normally like to do, they're going to need to free up some spots. So where could those come from? We'll talk about a few other players we like and how they can clear up roster spots in just a moment. The NBA season is heating up, and there's no better time to get in on some NBA action than over at FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. If you miss the start of the game or you see a hot hand throughout the game and you want to get in, you want to try to turn some of your knowledge into some bucks, FanDuel's got live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks, and you can combine those live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. That's how I like to pay. I like to put a little bit down sometimes, and I like to go for the long odds and see if I can score a really big payday. And I do so responsibly, and I do so legally. You should too. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. Cavs back at home against the Raptors on Thursday, giving up 7. And right now, FanDuel is giving Locked On Guardians new FanDuel customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head on over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Now, as always, we want to thank you for making Locked On Guardians your first listen today every day wherever you get podcasts, and an even bigger thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You are the reason we keep showing up and doing this. Jeff and I love to talk baseball. We'd be texting and doing and tweeting about it, but we show up here every day talking baseball with you because it's enjoyable and you make it that way. So thank you. And make sure you keep it with all things Guardians during the off season by hitting the bell on YouTube. You get notified of the latest Locked On Guardians episodes, including the bonus video I did on Wednesday about Andy McKay. Since Jeff had a full episode, I had some thoughts I wanted to get out. So that's up there if you want to check that out. You can also auto download wherever you get podcasts. We're free everywhere you get podcasts. So you keep the show in your feed no matter what's going on, even during the holiday season. And you can take us with you when you walk your dog or you're working out or whatever you're doing. Maybe you're shoveling snow. Ugh, the thought of that makes me a little bit sick, I got to be honest. But that is life right now. All right, so Jeff, there's a couple more names I want to get to before we talk about the roster fodder that could make room for these guys. So we talked about Genao, talked about Gomez and Kahlil Watson. If it was me, my number 3 on this list would be Austin Peterson. I kind of wonder if declining John Means' option made it more likely that they would protect Austin Peterson. Like, didn't do as well at AAA as I would have liked to see him do. You know, I were both very high on him coming into 2025, and it does take guys some time to get used to the AAA ball, but the stuff was okay. The strike throwing is still there. The fastball is kind of hittable. There's a good changeup. There's a good curveball, slider. I think he's like a really nice, like, back of the rotation guy, very safe because he's durable and throws strikes. That to me is a guy I think would be an easy stash for like the Miami Marlins or the Washington Nationals or the Chicago White Sox. Like, the White Sox, that's not usually their guy because he's not a high octane guy, but like it just seems like he'd be a really easy fit in a draft. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with you on multiple levels with that. He is the loss of Means makes him a guy who just strikes me. I agree as a player that they more than ever need to kind of keep hold on to and pay attention to. The other thing with him, I think, is, as you mentioned, it can be a hard transition to AAA. It's a different ball. We saw guys like Logan Allen and the like kind of struggle in the initial promotion to the level. And, we know he has great extension. We know there's a lot of positive traits. But you need some solid depth and starting pitching. Yeah, there's a lot of teams. San Diego might take a gamble on someone like him with their need for pitching depth. Like, there's going to be teams, I think, who would gamble on a guy who's got some size, some velocity, does a lot of things well. I'm with you. He'd probably be my 3 just because, the need for starting pitching depth is there.
Yeah, and then the last guy I have on my list is, I think, more than likely to be added, or maybe 50-50. I think the rest of the guys on my list are less than 50-50, is Steven Perez. Now, he hasn't been to AAA yet, but we've talked about him multiple times. Left-handed reliever who, Cleveland could always use more of because Hare and Henches and Eric Sabrowski all have their individual issues, whether it's health or strike throwing. And in Sabrowski's case, it's both. But Perez is a fastball slider guy who can get up to 96 and really took a step forward with his control in 2025. I'd like to see what he does at AAA. Left-handed reliever who can throw 96. That's gonna at least get on some teams' radars if he's there. I'm not saying it's. I think I said at best it's 50-50 they add him, but it's the last one on my list that I think is at least even. The rest of my list are unlikely, but are worth talking about.
It's interesting. I would put DeLucia ahead of him just because of the stuff. But I mean, I get it. It's a lefty with velocity. It's a combination that is hard to find. He's that guy where it's kind of the classic. I wouldn't be shocked either way. If they added him,
Yeah.
I get it. If they didn't, I get it. Like, it just makes sense no matter what, however they decide to handle it or go about it with him. So I'll be curious to see. It is hard to find lefties. We know, you and I have been looking at left-handed relievers at points throughout this offseason. So he is an interesting option. And as you pointed out, don't have a ton of guys internally. So, yeah, I could understand it. I just feel like for me, with him kind of being kind of limited, but you know me too as well. I've been a DeLucia guy since they drafted him, so I probably have some built-in bias, being real honest.
No, I like DeLucia too. I mean, to me, DeLucia was actually not next on my list. Next on my list is Wilfredo Antunez, but I'll get to him in a second. But DeLucia, is definitely a guy who might be on the radar for. I don't know the situations of all the other teams in baseball in terms of their roster and what they might be looking at in a Rule 5 draft or who they're protecting. But yeah, DeLucia's got a 3-pitch mix. He's just undersized, and the delivery to me is high risk for a reliever. But that's what you take in these drafts. A lot of relievers go in these drafts. He doesn't have a lot of innings at AA, like Perez has more. So that's why I think that DeLucia's less of a risk to be taken. I like DeLucia just fine, but I think he's less of a risk to be taken just because he has a little bit less exposure at AA, and he's right-handed. So I think that Perez might carry a little more value, at least this particular Rule 5 draft cycle.
I get that. I can see that, just the lefty versus righty thing. I don't know. It's like the pitch mix feels very primed to take off this year, and I think if you're a team that is betting on ceiling, even though he's a righty versus a lefty, like if you're looking at a guy who you're hoping could potentially be an eighth inning guy, I think that's DeLucia, not Perez.
He certainly has the I'm going to say the bulldog mentality, even though Ole Miss is not the Bulldogs. He wouldn't want to be called a bulldog. He is a rebel, where he pitched in the College World Series, and I think he was the most outstanding player of that College World Series. Yeah. And then he had Tommy John because Ole Miss ran his arm into the ground, and that's why he didn't debut in Cleveland until 2024. But he's been good the last 2 years. So yeah, I like him a lot, but I think like for right now, Perez is higher on my list. Wilfredo Antunez, I know a lot of people like him. He showed plenty of power this year in the corner and right field at Lake County and Akron. He was off to a good start in the Arizona Fall League before he had a shoulder injury. He had 2 home runs in 2 games, so he was a lot of fun. The thing with Antunez is like he's not a great defender. He's got a cannon. He's got pop, but there's a lot of like left-handed Oscar Gonzalez to that game. Like the defense overall in right field is not strong, and the approach is a little bit scary. Like I don't know if it's as extreme as Oscar Gonzalez, but it's in that range. So I just like I don't think we're gonna have another Anthony Santander here. I don't think we will, but you never know. Like there's still that risk here with a guy like this.
Yeah, it's he is another guy who was eligible a year ago, and we kind of debated and talked through.
He's a minor league free agent this offseason until Cleveland re-signed him.
So he had 6 years. Him and Perez were both that, right? And we had our debate about that as well. I just can't see a team jumping. Like, I might be wrong. Here's the other thing I'm just going to say. For the most part, like, Arizona is where hitters go to excel. It's more of a concern if someone doesn't excel there or when a pitcher really steps up, right? We talked about that in the past. Like, pitcher dominance stands out to us in that situation. So it concerns me with Rosario being out there with his struggles, but the fact that he went out and just tore it up is something that I don't want to say doesn't make him to me more likely to be drafted.
Yeah. All right, we got one more name to talk about, and then we've got roster fodder to go through as far as who might lose their spot next Tuesday. And then we got to talk trade talk Thursday. 2 players I'll throw out to Jeff, see what he thinks on today's show. We'll get into that in just a second. Hey, if you're in need of more Guardians baseball talk to warm you up during the winter, you can always follow Jeff at Jeff MLB Draft everywhere, and myself at JL_baseball or JL Baseball. And you can also join the Locked On Guardians Insiders Club, where we text daily with the community, drop some news and rumors that we're hearing, explain some news and rumors too. They get mailbag questions from our insiders. We do monthly video chats, which we're due for one here soon. Provide some bonus content as well. And that's joinsubtext.com/LockedOnGuardians to tap in. The last thing I was going to bring up, Jeff, was Jake Miller. Probably not a guy I'll get added either, but was a $300,000 20th round pick, which is unusual. Had a breakout year as a reliever, but really struggled in AAA. You and I were like, thought he was on the path to be added this offseason, but his struggles in AAA, I think, might have put a stop to that. And that could be true of looking at Perez too, because like he didn't even get to AAA. So who's to say that like Perez wouldn't have had the same issues there? So Jake Miller's on the radar for me, but I don't think that, I don't know. It's not somebody I probably would roster at this time, not with the guys ahead of him.
The thing I'll say with him in particular too is like, for a team, like he could make sense to poach because he did pitch really well in AA. You mentioned the big bonus. His brother Cole got, $1 million plus bonus as a pitcher out of high school to Oakland. His dad Steve was a receiver in the NFL. So not only was he a big bonus guy himself, he comes from a really athletic family. He had a great year, and everyone knows that AAA can be a rough transition. So while it was not the best performance for him there, and it took him from like the definite list to the, well, maybe not list. I think he's, still a guy you want to pay attention to, and I could definitely see a team deciding that there's enough positive traits there to look past the struggles and to maybe anticipate that it's, the best is coming. He also had arm issues, so he's also had that delay in development as well.
His dad didn't front an 80s band? Steve Miller?
He is not a joker.
Not that Steve Miller? Okay, no. He's not a joker.
No, he's not a joker.
Time does keep on slipping.
People don't call him Maurice either.
The players that could be on the bubble, I think on Tuesday, I think the easy ones are Brennan and Nolan Jones. I think, I mean, you've got DeLucia on the 40-man now. You've got Kafis. You've got Valera's there, Kwan, Ana Martinez, Daniel Schneemann, Noel and Rodriguez, who, also could be on the bubble. But, I think Brennan Jones are your most likely guys that could lose their spots on Tuesday to make room for some prospects and maybe keep the Guardians under 40 heading into the winter meetings.
Yeah, and I think Nolan Jones in particular stands out because we know that Jose is the highest paid player on the team. Kwan and Tanner will be 2 and 3. 4th, I believe, is going to be Trevor Stephan. 5th is Miles Straw. 6th, based on arbitration estimates, would be Nolan Jones.
Can't do that.
No, he's a $2 million guy. I just can't see that happening. So I think Nolan Jones, and I do think... maybe there is a world where someone's like, why did they keep Brennan? They were maybe there's, he's got this organization puts so many people into other front offices. He might still have fans out there. So that maybe they will sit back and, try to do one of those, do their own version of the Caminero or the type of deal where, you're going to flip him for a lotto piece and maybe get lucky knowing that 99% of the time you won't. But those two, and then honestly, you can't have Rodriguez and Noel. So I think one of them, I wouldn't be shocked if they went in and, released 3 guys and added 4, maybe 5 at max, and then kept a spot open just to see who else and what everyone else is doing. Now they can also, you can't add any of these guys for people who don't know the draft. Like you can't get back after the deadline next Tuesday, and I can't add, Miller after that point. But you can cut guys, you can move guys off, you can make other, transactions with players. But it just from that point on, any player who is Rule 5 eligible cannot be added to your roster until after the Rule 5 draft at that point. And, we'll have to see. I mean, heck, we still haven't heard a finalization on the Paul Stewald deal. So maybe it's a David Fry-esque situation.
That's cash at this point. It's just cash.
They have 6 months. They have 6 months from the trade.
6 months? Okay.
6 months.
I also wouldn't rule out Zach Kent as a guy who ends. I think he's out of
Yes.
options next year, so he was good to have on the roster because he was optionable. He won't have options next year, so um, probably a guy who's also on the bubble. Like Franco Alamon, I think is probably safe, but depending on how they decide to go, like that's a guy who could be in a conversation. And then I think they'll keep Doug Nikhazy for depth, but like also never know depending on how many people they want to add and if they make any trades. I wouldn't rule out a trade on Tuesday either. They've done that in the past where they've traded maybe with the Tobias Myers deal, like Nolan Jones deal. Those trades all happened on Rule 5 deadline day. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll let you know if we hear anything. All right, Jeff, could the Guardians add and subtract to their offense? That'd be very strange. But there's two names that have been mentioned very lightly. I'll put this out here. So Bob Nightingale of USA Today, who, take things with a grain of salt. He's definitely not the Jeff Passan league, but he's not as bad as the John Morosi league. He's like probably closer to Morosi than Passan, but definitely not Morosi.
Yeah, I mean, no one's passing. So
no one's Passan and no one's Morosi. But he says that the Dodgers expect to talk to Cleveland again about Stephen Kwan. I still don't believe they're going to make that trade because I just don't see how, if they didn't like the offers for Kwan back in July, they're not going to get any better unless Cleveland really believes that Kwan has peaked and they want to dump him now and they don't think he's going to rebound or get better, like they did with Jimenez, right? They tried to get out of Jimenez's contract before he hit even more, which he was worse with Toronto this past year, even though he played well in the World Series. That's the only way I can see Cleveland deciding to do that, but I don't buy that they're feeling that way.
yeah, it'd be a sell low point, right? And that's not something they tend to
Correct.
do unless. And the reason they sold, I know someone's, but they sold low on Jimenez. They sold low on Jimenez because they realized it was a sunk cost and it was their last chance to sell him. Like after the year he had this year, with the way his contract was accelerating, you couldn't give Andres. Toronto can't give Andres Jimenez away right now. There isn't a team in baseball that would take him at what his contract is. So, they did that move. Again, I'm going to point out, like outside of that deal, this team has not sold guys with 2 years of control in a long time. It would be selling low, and it's also just for a team that needs outfield help. And the Dodgers aren't, I mentioned on the one show, like there's 4 center fielders that are 4 WAR or better WAR last year. One of them's Andy Pages. You're not getting Pages. Pages is already better than Kwan. So like you just got to already take that out of your head. That's not happening. It's like you're happy for Alex Call, and I guess here's my question to you: like if they're gonna do this, can I throw you a trade that's gonna make you really he and ha? Can I give you a trade that's gonna hard on your soul?
If it doesn't include Dalton Rushing, I don't want to hear it.
I think you do. I disagree with you. I think you're gonna want to hear this one.
All right, I'm listening.
So Alex Call, because then they won't need him anymore, and Mike Sirota for
Steven called in. Yes, called in. I'm done.
I told you I told you to do it without rushing. I told you I can make it happen.
I would take Mike Sirota in a heartbeat, but the Dodgers have been after Sirota for a while, so I have a hard time believing they'll move him. But give me Mike Sirota any way possible. We were on the Mike Sirota train going into the 2024 draft before he kind of fell off the map that year, unfortunately. But the Reds decided they were going to trade with the Dodgers, who've been wanting him since he was in high school. Not a great move.
How the Dodgers get Sirota and Tibbs for like nothing? Like that's
because
just
not only do they have all this money to spend, but they go out and they sign international prospects that are great, and then they also go out and get other people's prospects for pennies on the dollar. Stop trading. You know what? Don't trade with the Dodgers. Don't trade with the Rays. Don't trade with the Dodgers, and that makes sense.
The Guardians won their last Rays trade. Full stop.
They did.
They won their last Rays trade.
Speaking of the NL West, let's get to one more Trade Talk Thursday item before we get out of here. This was brought to me by an insider about Ketel Marte. There's been some talk about how 7 teams have contacted the Diamondbacks about Marte. Now, he is 32, and his contract is pretty hefty. The Diamondbacks say they don't expect to move him, but that's what they all say when they're not expected to move somebody. Most people in the industry believe that if they are gonna trade him, this is the offseason to do it, given his age and salary.
And he'll be a 10-5 guy in July.
Exactly.
So they have to move him now.
So I'm in on Ketel Marte, but here's the thing. What I saw from one report was that they were looking for a major league pitcher, they were looking for a prospect, and another minor league pitcher. So to me, with Ketel Marte and his experience level and his contract, I'm thinking for Cleveland, like they're gonna ask for Gavin Williams, they're gonna ask for Angel Genao, they're gonna ask for Cal Steffen or Cal Steven or God, even maybe Braylon Doughty, and I'm 100% out on that package. Unfortunately, I
I
don't think
think,
anything less gets it done. By the way,
yeah, that's the problem. It's like I'm not. Someone in our comments brought up like a trade, and I'm not willing to trade Gavin Williams right now.
no.
That's full stop for me. Like if you can do something like Cal Steffen, and I would be willing to talk a Ralphie or a Genao or
Yes.
someone here. And then if they're willing to talk about Cantillo, if they're willing to take a gamble on kind of tier 2 instead of tier 1, yeah. I mean, I think the other important thing with Marte is in my head, but now that I look at his numbers, I think it's true. In my head, I'm like, doesn't he always miss a few games a year? Doesn't he a guy? But I think it's just more my mental concern of just because of age and the number of games played that he only played 126 year. I feel like he's been kind of a guy who is so 126, 136, 150, 137, 90. So he has been a guy who's missing about 23 games a year on average. Or a player in 2 year who's over $100. Yeah, like I'm willing to talk if we're talking, Cantillo, Genao, who is my number 2 prospect in the system, and a Cal Steffen. Yeah, I'll jump if they're willing to talk that. But I know Arizona will tell us no, and they're fans, and I totally understand and agree why. But you can't. With what Gavin Williams showed you a year ago, you can't move him right now. His arrow is pointing way, way up, and I feel like you're short circuiting that value based on what we saw.
Yeah, if Ketel Marte,
yeah,
if Ketel Marte was like 28 or 29, I would say I'd consider it for Williams, but he's 32, so
yeah,
the decline does kind of scare me. If Williams was closer to free agency, I'd also consider it too because we know that's going to happen at some point. But that now is not the time.
And he's a 6 foot or a sub 6 foot guy, depending on where you look. And
yes, the age there.
That's traditionally a height does not age well.
Correct. Yeah. So, but hey, Ketel Marte, man, boy, I can't
I'd love
imagine.
to have him. Yeah,
I couldn't imagine a better fit for this lineup. Second base and the bat and so switch hitter. Yeah, all those things are great and would be a good fit. I'll be curious to see what Arizona does with him this offseason if they move him. Just pray it's not to the Tigers or something. All right, coming back on Friday with more content for you. Of course, we'll talk 2026 opening day roster projection 1.0. We'll do a few of these throughout the offseason. I'll kick it off tomorrow by talking about who I think will be on the opening day roster, and I'll also tell you who I think should be in the lineup by the end of the season. So stick around for some forward-facing Guardians talk.
Yep, I didn't even get to make any of my my Rooster jokes today, so stay tuned next week so I can get all of my puns in.
Yeah, Cheeks Malone says, what was his line? It was a little more.
I can't remember.
Gosh, Cheeks, let us know what your line was.
Well,
there
I was thinking, is he a Rooster Master? I can't call him the other name on it. Just having some fun, or jokes about running afoul. I just love a defense that is, no, I'm just having animals fight each other to the death. I'm not doing the other thing.
We did tell our insiders. We heard something about that a while ago.
Yeah,
just saying.
But more fun with the pitcher who should not be named. But thank you all for joining us. Remember to rate and review, download daily. It helps. I know the screen is green. I'm working on it. Thank you all.
They've
and
come
go
to stuff the rooster.
But thank you all. And if you have advice on how to fix the greenness on a camera, let us know that. Thank you all, and go Guardians, go.